Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to be joined by Derek Camp. He is the Senior Manager of Operational Analytics at Milo's Tea Company. And we're going to talk a little bit about analytics, of course. We're going to talk a little bit about Derek's background, his journey with Milo's Tea. He's been there for a while, and we're going to talk to him about how his career has kind of led him into the analytics side of the business and how they apply analytics within Milo's Tea to the logistics side of things and the operational side of things, and how you can start to get some of those tools and put those together to be able to leverage those and make better decisions, see more insights into your operation, and just overall be able to improve your operation too. So very interested for this conversation. Met Derek back at the work conference, I believe, right? And we kind of hit it off a little bit and came out and we enjoyed some time together over in Philly too, at Home Delivery World, I believe. And now we're going to talk here on the podcast and bring some insights about analytics. So, Derek, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Definitely happy to have you on here. Happy to talk to you and happy to dive into this topic. I am admittedly a little bit of a data and analytics nerd back when I was working in the warehouse and stuff, and so I'm happy to kind of have you join me here and hear a little bit about how you guys leverage this. So tell us a little bit first, I guess. Tell us a little bit about your background first, and tell us a little bit about your career now at Milo's Tea, and maybe for people that aren't familiar, what is Milo's Tea?
Milo's tea is a refrigerated, ready-to-drink tea, and there's actually a real person named Milo. The quick story from the company is Milo Carlton served in World War II, and when he returned stateside to Birmingham, Alabama, he opened a restaurant, and it became famous for
Oh,
hamburgers and sweet tea. And it
interesting.
Yeah, and the family noticed that sometimes people would just come up and get the sweet tea, and that's it. And so fast forward to that point to 1989, the Carlton family started uh, putting Milo's famous sweet tea in gallon jugs and selling it to local grocery stores.
Mm,
And fast forward to today, we are the number one refrigerated tea in the country, and we are in all 50 states. So if you are a tea drinker, then go pick up a gallon and see what you think.
yeah, yeah, definitely, and definitely good tea. I've had it before, and a big iced tea fan myself, especially sweet tea on the side of it. So very interesting story. I didn't actually know that history. So it's interesting how people like the tea so much. I guess they said, forget the hamburgers, let's focus on the tea, right?
Well, I mean, we are in this. I mean, I'm from Birmingham, Alabama. The company is
Yeah.
based in Birmingham, so it's a southern thing, but we're reaching across the country for sure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about your background and kind of your journey with Milo's here, because my understanding is that you kind of started on the floor, right, on the warehouse floor.
Well, not really. I started in replenishment, and
Okay.
I started 11 years ago in replenishment. We were a much smaller company then. We were more of a regional tea company, and um, so worked in replenishment. Sort of managed the replenishment of our largest customer, and then sort of over time, it morphed into more sales analytics, and then
Mm,
so I did that for about 4 years, and then moved over to operations about 7 years ago and started working with the logistics group and doing the analytics for
got it.
them. And it just sort of started gradually, taking on, more and more work from different parts of operations. And so now I manage a team, and we provide analytical support for all of operations. So, supply chain, logistics, quality, production, CI, maintenance, and inventory. So we kind of cover it all.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. And I think it's an interesting thing too, like going from that sales side perspective a little bit, and then coming over to the operations side. And I'm curious. I mean, how did your kind of analytics interest or knowledge, where did that come from, and what really sparked you wanting to kind of continue down that road and continue to develop those analytics more?
Well, here's the thing. I had never really worked at an analytics job
Mm,
my whole career, and I was looking to make a change when I moved to Milo's, and saw the job opening and applied for it, and said, I thought to myself, I've never done this job, but reading the job description, I think I could do a good job with it. And
mm.
I applied, and they brought me in. They actually interviewed me and asked me to take a test, sort of an exercise, and
Oh, interesting.
um, I'd I'd never. They asked me to do a lot of work with, you know, inventory days of supply, and like find all the problems in this particular set of data and prioritize them. And so I really had no idea. I'd never worked in replenishment before, but apparently
Mm,
whatever I wrote was good enough. I guess it impressed the right person, and they hired me on. And from that point on, it was a lot was geared toward analytics. But we were such a small company then, even though I worked technically in replenishment and in sales, it was not uncommon to reach out across different parts of the business and say, "Hey, we're really having trouble with this particular lane. We need to go ahead and expedite this." And then the scheduler would come to me and say, "I've got these three loads. How do you want to do it?" And I would say, "Okay, do them in this order." And so it really being in the company when it was that small allowed you to wear a lot more hats and understand, how all the pieces fit together in the way that they do. So when I moved to ops, it was almost, especially in logistics, it was more of a natural move. I already had a really good foundation for it.
nice. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's really interesting too. I mean, to hear that pivot a little bit, and I'm guessing, I guess you passed the test, you could say there for sure,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, as you kind of started to make this move and you made this change on more of the analytics side, I mean, how did you kind of take some of, because I think oftentimes people maybe find themselves in similar positions, right, where they end up, going after something that initially maybe they didn't start their career out or weren't necessarily set on, but then can then find some, insights from what they were doing previously and bring that into what they're doing now. So how did some of like your earlier career experience kind of help you when it came to now looking at analytics and going after like that type of role?
It just, it, my the jobs that I had before were, they were, of course, they weren't analytical jobs, but they always had
Mm,
you had to exercise the analytical part of your brain. And so, I really just called on experiences of the work I'd done in Excel, and understood, kind of how numbers kind of work together. And so, just once I understood the lingo, and I understood kind of what key terms meant in this replenishment role, it really wasn't too bad in terms of just taking all of my past analytical work, which really was sort of a side of the desk type of thing, and really
mm,
putting it onto the main part of the desk. Um, just understanding, you know, how formulas work, understanding, like how to write them in Excel. That was the big thing. Back then it was, we didn't I didn't at least know of everything because it was my newest role about SQL and
mhm,
Python and things like that. I worked everything in Excel, but just understanding how all of that worked and everything was relatable to that, and how numbers fit together. Yeah, that was the biggest thing. Once I got a really good understanding of the domain knowledge of where I was going, which, I always tell people that's one thing you really have to be a really good analyst, is you have to understand the domain. And once I
mm.
understood that, then that's when things really took off for me. And so I really had the basis of it down, of how I thought, and how I worked in Excel. But once I understood the domain, it took off from there.
Interesting, interesting. So how did you go about kind of starting to, I guess, obtain that knowledge and, go about like learning more, and how could you dive deeper and get some of that domain knowledge that you were just talking about as well.
Oh, I mean, I ask anybody and everybody questions that I could. I mean, I was
Yeah.
we had a replenishment contact that, that I work with our big customer, and I would talk to him all the time and just ask him questions. We had a broker that worked with us a little bit. I would ask them questions all the time. I would ask our shipping person, like our shipping manager. I'd ask him questions all the time. I would ask our purchasing manager questions, and so there was not a person in the company that I didn't go to and ask questions.
Mm,
Really the hardest part is I was hired, and probably the first 6 weeks of the job, my boss, who was the vice president of sales, he wasn't there, but maybe 4 days out of those 6 weeks. So here it is. I'm in a new
mm.
job. I'm in a new field. I don't know much about CPG, and then my boss is out of town on various work trips and PTO, and it's sometimes I think back and go, how'd you get through it? But you got through it day by day.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think, that kind of goes to show, like, don't be afraid to ask, right? And, if you're curious, chase that curiosity and you'll learn about those things, whether it's what you thought it was, or whether you thought it was, or it's something totally different than what you thought it was. Either way, you're gonna learn by asking that, and, being inquisitive and curious for all those things. So as we kind of learned about your career a little bit up to this point, and how you kind of got into the analytics side, and grew within that part of the business. So tell us a little bit about, from the operational perspective. I mean, what are some of the key analytics that you're measuring in the operation, and why?
It really varies on what department you're looking into. For quality,
Mm,
we have a metric called CCPM, which is consumer complaints per million, and so that is more
okay.
of a quality metric that tells our consumers calling in with complaints about your product, whether it's taste or packaging or whatever. So I mean, we have an analyst that looks at that and tries to find ways to become more efficient in that particular metric. When you looking at supply chain, you're looking at you know how are we applying the forecast to supply chain. What is our cost of goods on hand. We look at all of that in supply chain. Logistics, of course, is OTIF, on time and in full.
Yeah.
I'll come back to that in a minute. But then in production, and this sort of falls into CI and production, but we look at OEE, and that basically is a metric that tells you how efficient you're running your plant. And so if you the higher OEE you have, the more product you can make in less time, and the lower OEE you have, you're not really being efficient in making your product. And so that is sort of what starts the OTIF metric, is the on time and in full. Shipping or
Mm,
logistics can't ship it unless production can make it on time. And so we look at
right.
OTIF as well, and it's really the overarching customer service metric for us, because that's really what our customer looks at first when you go and talk to them in a line review. Is, okay, you want us to take on more of your product or expand what you have. Well, how good are you at filling the shelves now? And if your OTIF
Mm,
is high, then starts the conversation off in a good way. So when you kind of look all the way around, those are the biggest metrics that we measure, and the why behind it.
mm. Interesting. Yeah. And I think, those are and I love too that you talked about how the one metric is tied to the other metric in a sense, and, they kind of relate to each other. So I'm curious, I mean, how did you start to, as you started to learn more about these metrics, and, how to measure them and things like that? I mean, how did you start to, maybe, I guess, like, pick them apart a little bit, in a sense, to understand, like, what factors were, either, like you mentioned, the OEE, and how that's kind of tied to OTIF, and, how did you start to understand that, okay, like, this is tied to this, or this can impact this one? Like, how did you start to understand that, and help the operation start to root cause, and figure out, like, where there are actually problems, because maybe the metric is, not where it should be or it needs improvement? How did you really start to pick that apart when you started to learn more?
Well, I mean, I sat in one of my first operations meetings. I sat down, and the plant manager said, "Okay, OEE is this." And I looked around, and I was thinking, "Am I the only one that doesn't know what OEE means?" And so I had to grab him after the meeting and say, "Okay, what is this metric you're talking about?" And
Yeah.
and he explained it to me, and really started asking a bunch of questions. Over time, you got more and more comfortable with it. And so a great example I can give is we had one line that was not performing as well as the other as all the other lines. And so
Mhm.
we kind of got a team together and said, okay, like we've got to fix this. And we just started looking at, I don't want to say granular data, but we anytime you look at it in production, you kind of have to break it down by, this is what you got to break it down by shift. And so
Mhm.
you're able to say, okay, this shift is doing this shift is doing that, and maybe shift A isn't an issue, maybe shift D is the issue. And so as we started breaking things down, we looked at things by hour and we looked at things by shift, and then we were able to tell the production supervisors, and we were able to tell CI is that if we can pull up this one particular area and pull it up, because this is the one with, it's the lowest hanging fruit, so to speak. We can pull that up, it's going to pull up the entire score. And sure enough,
Mm.
we communicated that to the production supervisor who was on that shift, and didn't take very long that once we figured all that out, the numbers started going up. So, to kind of recap your answer to your question, is just it just took time and exposure to learn it. And then once you know what levers to pull and start looking for, then that's when you get people involved that you can communicate with to help make the changes. You can't do it by yourself. You've got to
Mm.
have a team with you that can do it. So, um, that's how I started out learning everything I could about the different areas of operations, just by asking questions and just being exposed to what things mean. And there's always just that minute detail that nobody ever tells you that you have to figure out on your own.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's one thing that's a challenge sometimes, or that, as people are trying to, get deeper into their data or analytics journey, I guess we could call it potentially, right? And how to leverage those better is how do you you see this metric, right? And the metric's telling you that you're not necessarily where you should be, but now how do I like peel those layers back, right? And how do I understand, like you said, like, oh, there's this one thing that if we improved upon this, like this would like increase our metric by a decent amount, right? And make a big impact. And it's how do you kind of go about that? So I'm curious, how you structured, I guess, your team in that sense. Like how closely do you work with like the operations team on that front? Are you guys putting together the analytics, presenting to the operations team, and allowing them to root cause and do continuous improvement? Or are you also taking continuous improvement and root cause activities within your department and the analytics department?
It's a little bit of a mix with that. We have
Mhm.
a scorecard that or we used to have a scorecard. We kind of rolled it into something else, but we look at key metrics every week. And
Mm.
it's the ones that, my boss has a saying. He says, we run to red. So if something's red, it's not where it needs to be, and we go look at it. And so when
Yeah.
we're looking at, our metrics, we have one in particular that was not hitting what we were supposed to be. It was really low. And so I said, okay, we need to figure out why. So one of the guys on my team, I talked to him, said we need to, get more granular information about that. And then we need to figure out the why. Why are we not hitting this? And then we put a team together. We put a team together of the people who actually live it day to day. And so we have questions for it. We ask why. I think people get tired of us asking why, but we ask why all
Mm.
the time. But we do that, and it just depends on what comes out of the meeting. There are certain things that come out of the meeting to where the analysts will say, okay, like I can take care of that. I will go and pull this data and figure out what we're seeing here and how it's changing, or I'm tracking the data to do it. But then it um, could be that in one case it's the logistics manager. It falls on him to do a certain task that came out of that particular meeting, or maybe it fell on um, maybe it was the production supervisor. It fell on them, or maybe a certain task fell on the maintenance engineer to go do. And so, in this meeting, it's good to have different perspectives on everybody. So in one particular meeting, we had a maintenance engineer, we had a CI manager, we had production supervisors, and we had analytics. And so we had 4 or 5 different perspectives of a problem. And when something came up and an action item came up, it was pretty clear on whose area that fell into. And
Mm,
so we try to find the metrics that are not up to where they need to be, and then we go and we try to get the right people in the room in the right seats to fix it.
mm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I love that approach because I think, having like a stakeholder from each area that could have an impact on that and in the room together and going through that and understanding, does create like better clarity around that. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'm laughing when you say that, you ask why so much, because I remember I used to do that all the time and drive people nuts, right? And like, because they would say like, oh, well, yeah, because of this. I'm like, well, why? Why? Why do you do that? Like, you ask the five whys almost, right? Of like, why is that? Why do we have this problem and why are we not hitting this goal that we have in terms of this metric? And I think, it's so interesting to see that approach. And I think it's a very smart approach to get that involvement because then everybody starts to understand that and they start to understand, what impacts the levels and what impacts, us dipping or what impacts us going better. And how do we improve overall as an organization together, right? It's kind of like about tearing those silos down in a sense and being able to have that collaborative environment within the operations side of the business. So I'm curious, I mean, what from an analytics perspective, what kind of tools do you guys use? How do you leverage those tools to be able to get those analytics out there and have your operations folks have visibility into those metrics as well? What kind of tools are you using over there, Milos?
I mean, mostly we just like everybody else probably in 90% of the world is Excel and Power BI.
Yeah.
We have a little bit of we have an IT department that's does a lot of sort of the back end sort of thing, but analytically speaking, um, we have one guy that does a little bit of Python, but we do a lot of
Okay.
stuff with Excel and Power BI, and some of it is ad hoc things where and somebody just came up to me. This funny story is the supply chain came up to me and said, I needed like I had this date. I need to know when I run out. So can you help me? And I said, yeah. I said, yes. Yeah. So I went in and just
Mm,
put in the today function, in Excel and said, and then wrote a little form and said, okay, you'll run out of this product on this day. Every day it's going to update, it's going to adjust. So it's some of those ad hoc things that every analyst gets. But then we've got some things that really can go really granular. And I talked about OTIF before. We have a Power BI OTIF report that if you could tell me I know this particular lane, what the OTIF score was for the last 6 months, and we could go pull it really quick and say, okay, it's this. These are the reasons these POs were late. If we had to cut product for some reason, these are these are the reasons why we had to cut product, and
mm,
so we can do it really quickly. And I think that's a big thing when you get a request and you can turn it around within 10 minutes. That's really big. And then other things, we track between Power BI and Excel. We do most of it, but the things we track category spending in Power BI. We've done some work with that with our supply chain analysts, with our what I call our indirect spending. They buy anything from pens to palletizers. It's very wide ranging, and so they have to get category spend, and so that's in Power BI. But mainly that's our two big things. But it really spans the gamut between, on a given day, you're looking at, you know supply chains looking at how much they spend in these different categories, and then you're looking at, you know our CCPM, and why it was what it was in quality, and then you're looking at, what caused a certain line not to hit goal in the production floor. And so it is a wide range of different things that we look at, and most of it we have is through those two things. But we have a data warehouse that we use. We have a system that I may have talked about, but it's like a system where you look at when you go to a restaurant and they say, okay, we've checked in, here's a buzzer, and
Mm,
you will call you when you're ready. We have that for our drivers. So when they come in to pick up a load, they check in, and then a clock starts, and it says, okay, this is the amount of time that you're waiting. Then when they get put on a door, that clock stops. The wait time for the door starts, and so you've got a wait time, and you've got a load time, and a total time. We have a WMS that we use to look at shipments and cooler inventory. In fact, we're able to tie those together and see how fast different people in the cooler load cases. So, we have
interesting.
our logistics person can say, we like, what's the goal for how many cases somebody should load in a day, and they say it's X. Well, we can just draw a line and say, okay, everybody below this line, they need some coaching. And it could be
Yeah.
that maybe they're 90 days into the job and they've never driven a forklift before, but then you can track their
Mm,
progress week by week. And it's just because we've got two different systems that we're able to join up.
mm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's interesting to get that insight and see how you approach those different metrics and get that information. So I guess what about from like a visualization perspective? I mean, do you guys use like TVs in the warehouse or the operation to show these metrics, or how does that work? Do you put those metrics out there? I know people take like different approaches and have different feelings about that.
We have TVs up in the plant that
Mm,
show the OEE, and
mm,
I think we just put them back up. We had them for a while. I don't know why they went down, but we just put them back up. So if you're running a particular work order, you can see whether it's green if it's above goal, and it's red if it's not. And so you
mm.
can look at that and tell automatically how you're doing. It's kind of like, how do you know if you're winning? You look at the scoreboard type
Yeah.
mentality. And so we have that. We've got TVs in the break room that kind of roll through, um, different company news and things like that. We've got, quarterly town halls that all this information is disseminated out, and even from other departments. And we're working on getting something in the cooler to be able to show, how many cases we shipped out on a given day by shift as well.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I think that visualization is so important to be able to see that. And I think, just kind of just overall progress, like you said. I mean, I love what you said there, that you can't tell if you're winning if you don't look at the scoreboard, right? And I think that's a great thing there. So I'm curious your thoughts. I mean, while we're talking about, some tools and stuff around analytics, I mean, how do you feel about, are you leveraging at all AI in any way in terms of analytics? Do you think that's something that's kind of just a trend right now, or is there actually some practical applications in the analytics world where you can leverage that?
Oh no, I think it's here and here to stay. It's just going to get bigger and better as it progresses. We're not to that point yet, but
Mhm.
maybe down the line I could see us putting AI in at some point, but we're not quite there yet.
Interesting. Okay. And if people are looking to kind of start an analytics program within their operation, they're growing their operation, whether it's a warehousing company or other company that's doing distribution, fulfillment, and they're starting to bring in analytics and try to understand their data more to make better decisions and improvements within their operation, how would you recommend them starting that off in a good way and starting to build that program out?
I think number one for sure is whatever data you have. Number one, make sure it's right, and
Yeah,
number
that's a good one.
yeah, yeah, you can't have a good analytics program with bad data. But
Yeah.
make sure it's right, and make sure that it's well defined.
Mm,
And what I mean by that is sort of a data governance area. But if you're going to look at a table, you're setting up a table, then and you have it to where it says ship date on it, then everybody there should be a definition in there that says ship date is the day that it was shipped. So you have
mm,
so everybody knows there's no confusion around what that particular column or what that particular metric means. Is to have clear definitions so it's everybody in the organization knows what it is, because you could have a ship date, you could have a load date. They could be the same with a little bit of difference, and it could be that you loaded it one day and and shipped it the next, and that's two
mm,
different things. And so, whatever you do, you make sure it's right, and you make sure that it's well defined, and I would say you would make sure only certain qualified people. I don't want to say qualified. Certain people can touch it and make changes. You don't want it to kind of be the wild wild west where everybody can go in and make changes and that sort of thing. And that's sort of step number one. The step number two is after you get the data right and you get it validated and you know what it means. Then you start out with what do you want to measure. You start out
mm,
just by asking yourself what's important, what do we need to measure, and then you just kind of build it out from there. I mean, when I moved over to operations, there was that we looked at OTIF, and it kind of grew organically because I would have the logistics manager just ask me, "Hey, I wonder if we can do this. Can we get this? What about this?" And it just sort of snowballed from there to where reports got generated, different visualizations were made, and it just kind of happened organically. But the first thing is what's important to measure, and you just make sure that whatever data you have, it's right, it's well defined, and it's protected.
mm. Great insights there and great tips, definitely. And love that first one. Make sure the data the data is right. That's a very important one, definitely. And I love the definition one too. I think that's a big one. And I kind of was recalling some things in my career where we were continuously explaining to other parts of the company or operation that no, this means this and this means that. And I think that becomes increasingly important too as you start to mix in multiple systems as well, right? Because it may come up in one system as one thing, may come up in another system as another thing, but it's the same thing. So being able to have those definitions, I think, is a great point there as well. So very interesting to talk to you here, Derek, and really appreciate your insights on the analytics side of thing, and that's what analytics is all about, right? Insights. So it's
That's
good to
right.
talk to you and learn about how Milo's approaches this, and also hear some of your experience throughout your career and how you've developed this analytics program and learn more about analytics yourself as well. I think really insightful and useful for people out there to be able to learn more and have that never ending curiosity. So I want to thank you for coming on the show again. And if people are interested in either getting in touch with you or learning more about Milo's tea or where to get it and take a couple sips and taste it, what's the best way to do that?
You can go to drinkmilos.com, and that'll tell you all you need to know about Milo's tea, and where you can pick up a gallon or a 20 ounce and what flavors we have. And as for me, if you want to reach out and connect to me on LinkedIn, my name is Derek Camp, and I'm the senior manager of operational analytics for Milo, so shouldn't be too hard to find.
All right, great. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well so people can easily find it. So, Derek, thank you once again for coming on the show today.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's video here on our YouTube channel, The New Warehouse Podcast, and I appreciate you tuning in. If you liked what you saw, make sure you subscribe to our channel, and if you like this video in particular, make sure you like it as well. And if you want to get this great t-shirt that you see in the video behind me, Warehouses Are Sexy, head to warehousesAreSexy.com and get your own.